for less load on the bandwidth. Also, this event is going to be recorded, just to let you know. So the structure of today's event is as follows. Ram is going to introduce our wonderful speaker and also talk about the context of this talk. And our speaker, Mr. Satpal Muman, is going to speak for some time, and then we're going to open it up for comments and questions from the audience. So I think we have a smaller group today, so I think we can have a good discussion towards the end. Over to you, Ram.
Okay, thanks, Fatma, and welcome everyone. And this is one of the first events of this year, and I'm personally very glad that this is happening on caste and fighting caste discrimination in the UK, especially. Sorry if my internet is unstable, but I'll make it very brief. So firstly, I'm very glad to have Satpal Muman, and he's been at the forefront of anti-caste legislation in the UK and generally anti-caste work in the UK from nearly 2 decades, if not more. He is the co-founder and chairman of Caste Watch UK and a secretary of the Ambedkar International Mission, which is in London. Just a few remarks on why we wanted to do this event on caste. For those of you, especially because I'm very also happy to see that many of you are not from the usual South Asian audience that usually comprises for events on caste. So I'm very happy that it's a diverse audience. For those of you who've been following the news in India, you will see that daily events is dotted with caste violence or caste-based violence, both physical but also structural, and there have been numerous instances, not just dating to this government, but in fact, over a very long period of time. So I think for a continent or subcontinent with billions of people, to have a thousands of years old structurally violent system, I think is something vitally important for all of us in the academic community to know about, to think about how it affects our work. And I think it's very important that this is not just something that is an issue that is relevant only to South Asians. I think if we have support on these issues from people around the world, it's actually very useful in building up the pressure. And I think that's something hopefully today Satpal will talk more about in the efforts to bring about legislation. And the other thing also I want to say is that not just about caste-based violence, but also as a casteist ideology, it's no longer something that's geographically confined to the subcontinent. It is truly global as a way of thinking and as an ideology. There have been cases that are coming out from Silicon Valley. There have been various cases documented in the UK as well, and in many countries across the world. And not just instances of discrimination, but just as a way of structuring diaspora society itself to a large extent across the world. And today, especially in a conservative government, we can see a kind of a casteist ideology at work through the points-based immigration system designed to keep a large number of people out and in. So I think now more than ever, it's very important that all of us start thinking more and more about caste as a global kind of problem. And I'm very, I think we're very lucky that Satpal is here because he can give us a very in-depth look into what were the struggles to bring about legislation, what were the counter kind of campaigns, which is also, I think, a very useful understanding. So I hope that all of you will find this useful, find this interesting, and find this inspiring. And please feel free to ask questions, because we'll keep some time for question and answers. So with that, I'll stop here and hand it over to Satpal.
Well, thank you, Ram, Fatima, and Jairaj for inviting me and for hosting this event. Also, I would like to thank all the participants for taking out their time from their precious weekend. This subject of fighting caste discrimination in the UK over the last couple of decades is a huge area, and we have limited time. And it became a challenge for me to how to compress a 20-year campaign into a less than 1 hour conversation. There will be boring bits, there'll be exciting bits. You have to decide which is boring and which is exciting. But I will try and get to the bottom of some of the salient features of the campaign and the difficulties that we encountered. And without further ado, let me just kick into it straight away. And so let me say that Rishi Sunak, the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, during the course of a BBC interview by Lucy Hooker and Tom Espina, was asked a question on 9th of July related to identity. He said that in terms of cultural upbringing, I'd be at the temple at the weekend, I'm a Hindu, but I'd also be at Southampton Football Club, the Saints game as well on Saturday. You do everything, you do both. And in the interview, he said he had been fortunate not to have endured a lot of racism growing up, but there was one incident that had stayed with him. He said that I was just out with my younger brother and younger sister, and I think probably pretty young, I was probably a mid-teenager. And we were out at a fast food restaurant, and I was just looking after them. There were people sitting nearby. It was the first time I'd experienced racism. Just saying some very unpleasant things, the P word. And it stung me. I will remember it. I still remember it. He said that it seared his memory. You can be insulted in many different ways. However, he said that he can't conceive of that happening today in the UK. So according to Rishi, the fact of the name calling using the P word constitutes racism that's seared his memory and it stung him. So if a person is called a derogatory caste name, does that constitute casteism? Can we equate racism with casteism? If so, how and in what way? And that has been an ongoing discussion and a conversation for a very long time. Going back perhaps to the World Conference of Racism in Durban over 2 decades ago. Now, during the course of this conversation, we will return to the subject. And firstly, let me acknowledge and follow on what Ram has said, and acknowledge the brutal gang rape of Manisha in Hathras in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, and her subsequent death resulting from her injuries. Now, CASTWatch UK, together with Asian Solidarity Group and with over 35 organizations, have recently written to the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, calling on the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for the dismissal of Yogi Adityanath, Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. The latter also called for international inquiry into the rape and murder of Manisha and the subsequent handling of the incident by the authorities. Please join me to condemn the rape and murder of Manisha in the circumstances she found herself in. What is horrifying is that a few days later, there was another gang rape in Balrampur that was equally gruesome in its effect, leading to the victim's death. Don't really want to talk about caste. No one really wants to talk about caste. That includes me. Caste is a menace that hits you in the face as a lived experience. Some encounter it, others may not. How caste manifests itself in Britain is a topic of today's conversation. It must be emphasized that caste discrimination as a lived experience is very much nuanced and subtle in Britain, unlike caste atrocities and murder that is committed in India in the name of caste. Therefore, it makes it difficult to grasp, to understand, and to explain to a Western audience. Before I talk about fighting caste discrimination in the UK, I'm going to take a few minutes to answer the following question. Why establish an organization like Caste Watch UK in an advanced country like Britain? After that, I will touch on the brief journey of the caste campaign, the protagonists and the antagonists in that campaign, and where we are in terms of the equality legislation, dealing with the subject matter of discrimination and caste discrimination in particular that pertains to the equality legislation. According to my basic understanding, colonization generally is understood in terms of geography, a process of settling and establishing control over indigenous people's land for political and economic gain. However, there is another aspect to colonization, and that is a colonization of the mind. In the realm of psychology, culture, race, religion, philosophy, theories of political science, ideology, etc. So colonization should be thought of in terms of the invasion of our mental space, also rather than just geography alone. Well, let's proceed with the main topic of today's conversation. Now, the Labour government enacted a provision in the Single Equality Act 2010, via Section 95A, which gave power to the Minister of the Crown to amend Section 95A to include caste as an aspect of race to prohibit caste-based discrimination. In 2013, there was an amendment to subsection A that a Minister of the Crown must, by order, amend this section so as to provide for caste to be an aspect of race. In 2010, this was an obligation on part of the Minister of the Crown. The 2013 legislation amendment placed a duty on the minister to amend to make caste an aspect of race. In March 2017, the Government Equality Office opened a public consultation regarding caste-based discrimination in Great Britain. The consultation sought public views on what measures the government should take to outlaw caste-based discrimination. That consultation ended on 18th of September 2017. After analyzing the caste consultation response for almost a year, on 23rd of July 2018, the British government announced that it will not be implementing the caste law as envisaged by the Equality Act 2010, Section 95. But instead, the government will be taking steps to repeal the caste provision. Now, it is arguable, therefore, that unusual for Parliament to pass legislation, then the government in power to go out to consult the public whether to implement the law or not. One can only conclude the government came under powerful pressure not to implement the caste law and sought an escape route to reopen the public consultation under pressure from the anti-caste legislation lobby. Now, before I return to the anti-lobby, let me briefly chart the Caste Watch UK journey together with many other players in that journey that led to the enactment of the Section 95A, the law to prohibit caste discrimination. I will shortly set out who the protagonists are and who the antagonists are and their political settings in the campaign. Equality legislation is enshrined in the Equality Act 2010. Many of the participants may or may not be familiar with the measures it adopts in dealing with discrimination generally. I will also touch on that specific aspect very briefly. So just bear with me while I go through the brief journey of the campaign that Caste Watch UK undertook. So why was it necessary to form an organization like Caste Watch UK? I'm going to read out just a few of the personal testimonies of people who experienced caste discrimination in the United Kingdom as a lived experience. Hopefully this should help us to appreciate the ground realities that deal with caste discrimination and not to deal with the caste discrimination in the abstract. Before I do that, I want to emphasize that Caste Watch UK is a secular, non-denominational, independent and voluntary organization. It is not affiliated to any religious or political group, and we don't get any funding. We have got no money in our bank account. Now, so let me just go through the narrative of some of the testimonials which will set the ground realities. There's a testimony of a student in a school. He says, I first heard the word chura at the at the age of 15. I was confused and angry. This abuse started when I became friendly with a Sikh boy in my class. He had a cousin who is also in our class. The cousin was about the same height, build, and weight as me. His hair was long and tied up in a knot and covered up with small piece of dark cloth. This boy always told the other kids in the class, including the white kids, that he was a true Sikh and a true Indian warrior prince. One day at recess, he saw my friend and I were having a joke, and we were laughing so much, he came across and told my friend to stay away from me, and also told him that I was a Chuda, and that his dad had told him that Chudas were a dirty tribe in India and were also called untouchable. This happened every time my friend I talked. He said it in front of some of my other mates. This made me feel ashamed because they actually started to ask me if it was true when I was not sure what it meant. Another student says, I went to university and then suddenly my caste was more important than the degree I was doing. It wasn't what are you doing, what sort of person you are. It was what caste are you? And then I'll decide when I want to be to you, your friends. And in another incident, a student discovered that the real world that was finding out what about my caste identity when people at school perceived me as different. And consequently, I was rejected from certain caste groups at school. And another testimonial, I tell you, when I was in a secondary school, one of my close mates was a Jat. And she was a lovely girl, but she was not, and I mean not allowed to take any food item from me because of her caste. Another one, I was in an Indian sweet shop in Leicester, and the owner boasted about being a Brahmin, and he said he was higher than me. That was a God-proven fact. There was no arguing with him because he was so ignorant, so fixated with the idea of being higher. And another one, people are still mentioning the issue of caste and bringing it up when it comes to marriage. And generally it is the lower caste that are sort of outcast because people don't want to marry into a lower caste. And then we also find these days that those who originate from the lower caste prefer to meet someone of the same background because they know that they will perhaps be victimized, so to say, the fact they are of a lower caste. The first generation are still around and have very strong beliefs, and to some extent, they have put those. So here's another testimony. This is a testimony of someone who underwent intercaste marriage. To be born an untouchable woman, that child will always be known as unclean and dirty and regarded as a social leper and will never be able to move over the caste barrier. The mother who gave her birth will be regarded as unclean inside and would mean that child will be open to abuse. It does not matter how much money you have in the bank or how many degrees you have under your belt. Many will choose to define you by your caste. I was not allowed to go into the kitchen or touch food because I was considered impure. Now, during an election campaign, another testimonial, Councillor Khan said, the Biradari system is disgusting. We live in a Western society. I was born and bred in Birmingham, yet certain people criticize me for my caste. It was all came down to the gutter level of politics. People were saying, Tariq, Tariq is from this clan or this part of Pakistan, but I'm British, thorough and thorough. I represent every single part of the community, English, Afro-Caribbean, Irish, and every religion and every race. My politics are the work with the people, with all the people. This is gangster politics in Birmingham. I want to tolerate it. We cannot progress until we eradicate the Biradari system. So these testimonials, these few testimonials should make it clear that discrimination is about perceptions. It's about perceptions of who we are in terms of our perceived identity and how we treat others in terms of others' perceived identity. As social creatures, it's about how we process the perceived difference in our social settings and in our social relationships. Now, in a brief journey of caste campaign, I hope the above will have contextualized of how Caste Watch UK came to be where it is today. So briefly, in 1997, the Labour government led by Tony Blair came into power. In 2004, April, there was a BBC Radio 4 documentary entitled Caste Divide in Britain. In 2004, again in July, Caste Watch UK held its inaugural conference to address caste discrimination in Britain. So over subsequent years, Caste Watch UK held many conferences over Britain, across Britain, and to engage and work with communities. We also began to write to local authorities, British government, awareness of caste-based principles, practices, and which we emphasized needed addressal. Some themes during the multiple conferences that were organized: caste and community relations, caste and British legislation, caste and globalization, caste discrimination and challenges of multiculturalism, caste dynamics amongst the Indian diaspora, caste discrimination in the workplace and caste psychology, caste and identity and British discrimination law, caste and social cohesion, community engagement, and mobilization. So there's a whole range of topics that we covered over many, many years. So we provided input into the strength and diversity consultations launched by the government in way back in 2004. In 2005, Labour Party included a manifesto commitment to harmonize equality legislation. In 2005 September, Dalit Solidarity Network commissioned a caste study and published its report entitled No Escape, Caste Discrimination in UK, which was published in July 2006. This was the first study of its kind in the United Kingdom. One of the questions that was asked in that study was, do you believe that Indians living in the UK follow the caste system? 80% of those surveyed said yes to that question. In 2005, a discrimination law review was established under the Government Equality Office, which reported its findings in 2007 with a view to harmonization of equality legislation. Gordon Brown was the leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister from 2007 to 2010. The Equality Bill was drafted under the guidance of Harriet Harman, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, So in February 2008, Hindu Council UK is published its report entitled The Caste System. It argued that caste was a foreign construct, so any critique of caste and its Hindu linkages flowed, and blamed the British Empire and colonialism for entrenching caste in its divide and rule policy. It blamed the policy of Christian invaders to the Americas, to Australasia, and South Africa to suppress also and sometimes annihilate the host and their cultural practices. The report argued that caste, in its form of Varna and Jati, represented pluralism, which allows diverse communities to coexist. And similarly, in 2008, the Hindu Forum of Britain published a report commissioned by the Runnymede Trust. It was called Connecting British Hindus. This study recognized caste practices amongst the Hindus, but later Hindu Forum of Britain became a vehement opponent against introduction of caste in equality legislation. In 2009, a study was conducted by the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance entitled In Hidden Apartheid, Voice of the Community, Caste and Caste Discrimination in the UK, which was published, I think, in November 2009. In April 2010, the parliamentary process to enact the Equality Bill was completed following a final debate in the House of Lords, when amendments by the House of Lords were accepted to introduce Section 95A to make caste an aspect of race. Section 95A referenced caste and placed an obligation on the Minister of the Crown to make caste an aspect of race. It added an explanatory note to the Equality Act that made references to various religions in which the practice of caste was found: Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, etc. Now, pursuant to that illegal obligation, as under Section 95A, the government commissioned the National Institute for Economic and Social Research to study the scope and extent of caste discrimination, which was published in December 2010, entitled Caste Discrimination and Harassment in Great Britain. This is mostly a qualitative study, but on balance recommended for protection to be provided in law to victims of caste-based discrimination. In May 2010, there was a general election. A coalition of conservatives and liberal Democrats was formed. And in October 2010, the new Equality Act came into force. It brought together 116 pieces of separate discrimination legislation into one single act. In April 2013, under the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition government, an amendment to the Equality Act 2010 was introduced by the Enterprise and a Regulatory Reform Bill, which mandated the Minister of the Crown that legislation must be introduced to make caste an aspect of race. In early spring of 2014, Equality and Human Rights Commission commissioned a Caste in Britain experts and stakeholders seminar and socio-legal review. This was led by Professor Meena Dhanda and a lot of other academics that brought together under one roof all the anti and pro-caste legislation groups. Equality and Human Rights Commission supported the view of the caste study that caste should be made an aspect of race. Now, for the benefit of those participants here who are unfamiliar with the Equality Act 2010, I will summarize very briefly the key features in relation to what constitutes discrimination and the protection the Act provides. And I do apologize to those who are already familiar with the equality legislation. So what is discrimination in British law? Now, broadly speaking, discrimination means treating someone unfairly because of who they are. There are 9 protected characteristics. Discrimination which happens because one or more of these characteristics is unlawful under the Equality Act. If you are treated unfairly because someone thinks you belong to a group of people with protected characteristics, constitutes unlawful discrimination. The characteristics that are protected by the Equality Act 2010 are age, disability, gender reassignment, a marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation. The Act applies to employers, businesses and organizations which provide goods or services like banks, shops and utility companies, health and care workers like hospitals and care homes, someone you rent or buy a property from like a housing association and estate agents, schools, colleges and other educational institutes, transport services like buses, trains, taxis, public bodies like government departments and local authorities. Discrimination can manifest in a number of ways. This could be denial of equal opportunity, promotion at work, harassment. Now, harassment occurs when you engage in unwanted behavior, which is related to a relevant protected characteristic, which has a purpose or effect of violating a person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. The word unwanted means unwelcome or uninvited. It is not necessary for the person to say that they object to the behavior for it to be unwanted. Harassment is unwanted behavior, which you find offensive, for which makes you feel intimidated or humiliated. It can happen on its own or alongside other forms of discrimination. So unwanted behavior could be spoken or written words or abuse, offensive emails, tweets, or comments on social network sites, images and graffiti, physical gestures, facial expressions, and jokes. You don't need to have previously objected to something for it to be unwanted. So harassment because of one of these characteristics is called harassment related to a protected characteristic. It should now be obvious the way caste discrimination manifests in terms of violating a person's dignity, creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. So this form of discrimination should be only too familiar to those who face it as a lived experience. It does not require rocket science to know that in relation to caste, the protected characteristics that is most relevant is the characteristic of race. Hence its inclusion of caste under section 9.5 as an aspect of race. Now, legally, the language used to define racism can differ globally. But put simply, racism is where someone treats you as being inferior because of your color, ethnicity, nationality, or race. This can result in them treating you differently or unfairly. It can take many different forms, but it doesn't have to be intentional to be unlawful. Racism is not always overt in nature. It is also those subtle day-to-day comments, behaviors, or ways of working that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slates and insults. So race is usually perceived in terms of white, non-white color. Is caste a race? Well, can a caste group be deemed an ethnic group given the fact that caste can have a shared common history, religion, language, and cultural traditions and have common national origins? The answer has to be analyzed in terms of who is discriminating against whom. Whites will discriminate against maybe non-whites or on racial grounds, but they can also discriminate against whites on the basis of ethnicity and national origins. Blacks are capable of discriminating against other blacks on the basis of uh, nationality, African American, Jamaican, Haitian, ethnicity, and national origins. So I maintain that racial discrimination is interracial, whereas caste discrimination is intra-racial, namely discrimination amongst people of the same color, ethnicity, and national origins. Let me move forward a bit. So I will now move to talk about the opposition, which is a topic which I think you would be hopefully very much interested to hear. So over the course of a decade, we faced intense opposition from the Hindu section of the community. We saw the emergence of the Alliance of Hindu Organizations established during 2013. The Alliance of Hindu Organizations at that time consisted of 7 organizations who actively campaigned to sabotage the caste legislation. And I will name them here because they're available in the public domain. So they were the Hindu Forum of Britain, including the International Krishna Consciousness of UK, Hindu Council UK, National Council of Hindu Temples, BAPS Swaminarayan, Sanstha UK, National Hindu Students Forum, City Hindus Network, Vishwa Hindu Kendra, Southall UK, and there may be others added to that list. A written letter by the Alliance of Hindu Organizations on 20th of March 2014 stated that the word caste must not to remain in legislation. It alleged that its continued use is an act of anti-Hindu racial and religious violence and prejudice of the highest order. Orthodox Hindus also inducted some section of Sikhs into the fray to oppose the equality legislation. We argued that both Hindus and Sikhs enjoy legal protection against racial and religious discrimination. Caste discrimination is a human rights issue, so it should not be opposed. To undermine the caste campaign and to avoid to add further confusion, both Orthodox Hindus and the section of Sikhs began to play with legal semantics, calling for a legal definition of caste. Leading lawyers had argued that a definition of caste is not required in order to provide protection in law. So, an extraordinary event took place during the build-up to the 2015 general election. A campaign of vilification was started, targeting MPs and their constituents who supported the caste legislation. Newsletters and leaflets were circulated. Newspaper reports emerged of people being physically attacked by the opposing group on the streets of North London in Harrow. 8th of May 2015, a newsletter was circulated by RG Enterprises, a diversity consultancy advising the Hindus. It said that with the election coming up in the United Kingdom, there are many organizations and parties that are encouraging Hindus to be active by voting in this general election, but do not let this be a blind vote. So you should know the issues for the Hindus, Sikhs, and Jains. The caste clause in the Equalities Act is one of the biggest issues in this election. It said that this is an election campaign in which you as a Hindu, Sikh, or Jain can be directly involved by leafleting to give a donation to print leaflets. The leaflet explained that in general, Labour and Lib Dem MPs voted for the legislation and Conservatives against. However, some Conservatives voted for the legislation and some Labour MPs voted against. Some Labour MPs sat on the fence and did not vote at all because they were playing the game of hide and seek, also avoiding their constituents. The leaflet said that I would urge you, the leaflet read, to find out if your sitting MP voted for the legislation, branding you with the cast iron forever. It said that if he or she did, do not vote for them in this election and tell them why, so they understand. If they avoided the vote and the constituents, are they fit for office? The leaflet provided reference to Hindu Council UK manifesto, National Council of Hindu Temples, and Hindu Forum of Britain joint manifesto to oppose implementation of the caste legislation. The leaflet said that make your decision based on who the sitting MP is and what have they done for your community. The newsletter encouraged its supporters to actively seek out MPs to vote against them for supporting the caste legislation. As evidence, this was the first time in the history of British elections that caste became a major factor for a section of Hindus who also spoke in the name of Sikhs, Jains in the United Kingdom. The anti-caste legislation lobby launched a vociferous campaign to vilify parliamentarians to the effect of accusing Lord Bishop Harris and others of Christian propaganda and of religious intolerance. Further, they accused British Parliament of a continued colonialist mindset and accused the pro-lobby of vested interests. A new group called All-Party Parliamentary Group for Dalits, supported by Bob Blackman, Member of Parliament for Harrow East, was formed, who also chairs this group to the present day, according to my information. The Anti-Caste Legislation Committee was formed, led by an academic, Dr. Prakasha at Queen Mary College, who began to write blogs against the caste legislation, repeating the same mantra of fostering British colonialism and Christian anti-Hindu propaganda, etc. He began to argue that campaigners have a conversion agenda. He instilled fear of the impact of on the Hindu people. He accused the Equality and Human Rights Commission, British Parliament, government, judiciary, and said that they were all flawed and unfit bodies to legislate and adjudicate on caste. He said the National Institute for Economic and Social Research report published in 2010 and Equality and Human Rights Commission reports were flawed, lacking evidence, thoroughness, and that they were partial and biased. He claimed caste was being wrongly interpreted as an aspect of race, and there was a lack of caste definition. UK was a proxy for Christianity to have a go at India, he said. He was afraid, he said that he was afraid that similar legislation would extend to Europe and USA, that the legislation was anti-Brahmin and should therefore be thrown out. An article appeared in the Daily Mail on 31st of October 2017, summarized the various views. The article was headlined. It said, Modi's India on Britain's doorstep. Member of Parliament and Hindutva charity accused of pushing into the long grass the proposed law in caste discrimination. It reported that there was a link between Bob Blackman, Member of Parliament for Harrow East, and the National Council of Hindu Temples, NCHT. In 2015, they awarded the prestigious Dharma Raksha Award, later describing him as having been an Indian in a past life or destined to be one in a life to come. Blackman boasted on his own website that the award from the NCHT comes in recognition of work supporting the Dharmic community in strongly opposing the caste legislation in Parliament. In April 2017, there was a publication called Caste Conversion and a Thoroughly Colonialist Conspiracy by Satish Sharma, General Secretary of National Council of Hindu Temples. The document in question was released at the Indian High Commission by Subramanian Swamy, a senior figure in the BJP leadership. It states that the caste system in India and in Britain is a creation and imposition of white Anglican colonialism missionaries. Now, Dr. Prakash from Queen Mary University of London argued that the NCHT has acquired the position of being the leading voice for reasons that are not widely known. Satish Sharma, its General Secretary, is close to the Tory party, which also does not want the legislation. Shah says that the Theresa May government has used the most recent public consultation on caste as a choice between legislation and case law. He describes this as a fix to bury the issue by passing the buck to the British courts. Shah told the paper, the Daily Mail, that during the government's recent consultation, Satish Sharma took the Tory government's position that the case law should be retained, but the legislation not implemented. He said, we know that the figures within the Tory party have tended to promote him as the spokesperson for the anti-caste legislation movement on behalf of the Hindus. The government not only does not want the legislation, but it can also gain some electoral benefit by claiming that it got rid of the caste law. The conclusion is predictable. It is not a true consultation, but a fix. NCHT argued that Anglican jihadis found a soft spot in India's caste system, ripe for the stab of a supremacist evangelist missionary thrust. According to the NCHT, India's caste system was created by the Anglican jihadis of the British Raj, with their headquarters in Lambeth Palace blessed by the archbishop and bishops of the time. The NCHD claimed that Anglican jihadis created the caste system as an intrinsic element of their 19th century census activities and colonialist evangelical mission. And on the issue of a UK law to protect those at the bottom of the hierarchy from discrimination, the NCHD claimed that the Church of England is responsible and to be held accountable for the creation of the caste ideology and for trying to impose it yet again on Hindu citizens of Great Britain. The NCHD stands that Britain invented the caste and once again wants to impose it on the Hindu citizens of Great Britain is not one shared by the victims of caste discrimination. Okay, let me move a little bit further, getting closer now. So against this background of this febrile atmosphere, I went to the media to counter-argue and to allay some fears and misconceptions that had entered into the conversation and the discussions. There were a number of points on which the Hindus tried to oppose the legislation. Point number one, that the Hindus and Sikhs were objected to the inclusion in the explanatory note of the equality legislation, the references which were to the religions, Hindus, Sikhs, and Jains. And although the explanatory note expressed a ground reality, but Hindus and Sikhs viewed this as an aspect, as an attack on their religion. Now, I would say that I went public and we proposed that the religious references be deleted from the explanatory note. And the second point that they were trying to argue was that it undermines community cohesion. And we disagreed that the caste provision would undermine community cohesion. In fact, to the contrary was the case. The new caste protection will help promote community cohesion and promote peace and harmony and advance fairness and justice. The caste provision will strengthen community cohesion and not undermine it. And the third point they were objecting was the caste enumeration and caste disclosure. The inclusion of caste in the Equality Act would not require a declaration of caste. There should not be caste-based monitoring, and employees and the public authority should not be required to gather caste-based discrimination. And we don't believe, as campaigners, that there should be caste-based demographic monitoring and during the decennial census. And we argued and stated quite firmly that there will be no requirement declaring your caste. It is only if a person finds themselves subjected to caste discrimination and report it to the employer, service provider, school or college. And then there was another fourth point, status of religious charities. And so we again came to the view that there are exceptions that could be provided. And these exceptions are already in the Equality Act, and which allows employers or organizations in certain circumstances to discriminate, i.e. where a difference in treatment may be lawful. For example, a religious organization can sometimes restrict employment to one sex if the role is for a religious purpose. A religious or belief organization can ask people to sign up to a statement of beliefs in order to become a member. A charity might be able to restrict its activities or its benefits to people with a particular protected characteristic. So an association whose main purpose is to bring people together who share a particular characteristic may restrict membership and invitations as a guest to such people. So basically, there are exceptions, and some of these concerns could be handled by the exceptions which were already built. And there was another requirement of the public sector duty, disclosure of caste in employment, education, and provision of services. And there was another, under genuine occupational requirements, separate exceptions could be used to avoid making a certain type of caste-based discrimination unlawful. For example, exceptions and occupational requirements could be used when religious practices of a group require that certain rituals be performed by a person or persons of a status identity in common understanding associated with a particular caste group. And six, caste and ethnicity. Well, caste does not fall into a distinct ethnic group as per definition in Mandela versus the Kyo's going back to 1983, Mandela versus Dowley. Caste groups share the same ancestry, country of origin, language, culture, food, and be often the same religion. Despite this commonality, castes discriminate against each other. Caste groups are not ethnic groups. And there was a further point about positive action, and we stated publicly, we do not believe that there should be caste-based positive action in public bodies and in employment. Only employees need to be aware of caste discrimination so that caste-free work ethos created and employees know that their obligations are in respect of the law. So any breaches thereof should be dealt with disciplinary action in the usual way. Legal action under these conditions would only follow if there was failure in resolving employment-related disputes at places of work. So this is basically the summary of their concerns and our public statements in response to those concerns. So what was the reaction to the government's announcement to repeal the legislation? Now, this is very important because this really puts the cat amongst the pigeons. No doubt government had an eye on votes and on trade and commercial overseas interests. The National Council of Hindu Temples stated that it welcomes the government's conclusion and the proposed course of action regarding the issue of caste discrimination legislation. The NCHD stated that we established links with the Sikh and Jain communities, working very closely with the Hindu Forum of Britain, amongst other groups, and together managed to encourage over 8,000 British Hindus to respond. And further adds that our thanks also go to Honorable Bob Blackman, Member of Parliament, Chair of the APPG for Hindus, and the Hindu parliamentarians and community leaders. And then further it says among statements from, well, let me go back. There were further statements from Prakash Shah. He said from the Anti-Caste Legislation Committee, who argued that for both options, that is case law option and caste option, be dropped altogether, stated that case law option was probably due to Hindu lawyers. And he stated publicly that among those who were opposing was a gentleman by the name of Manoj Latva, informally Prime Minister Modi's attaché for British Affairs, who campaigned for the London Mayor's electoral contest, and Jayesh Chaitanya, who leads the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group for British Hindus. The signal was given at high levels that well-positioned Hindus would be satisfied with the ending of the legislative duty, while the case law could be retained without attracting opposition. The government latched onto this plan, buying time enough for the case law to be finalized. Now it is clear from Prakash Shah's above quotation that the British pronouncement to reach the repeal decision was connected to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Okay, so let me move a little bit further. Just give me a second while I scroll down. So let me now turn to conclude and perhaps return to where I started in terms of people's lived experience. Now, after the killing of George Floyd, the racial discrimination has received a greater global prominence in recent times, especially the anti-racial campaign led by Black Lives Matter. Major corporations, particularly in Britain, and I can evidence that, are now reviewing their policies and enforcing the messages of inclusion and against racism. I am privy to an internal survey where the following question was asked. This is, what does racism mean to you? And this one respondent said that, to me, racism is a conscious and subconscious belief that a particular race is superior or inferior to another, or that someone's moral and social traits are determined by their biological characteristics dependent on race. Racism is the separation of races in education, places of work, socially, and in the most part, this separation is woven through society in many aspects. Racism can mean the discrimination and prejudice directed against people solely because of their ethnicity and race. Racism to me is not always the blatant definition that most know. It is a deep-rooted feeling that you must jump over hurdles to get to your destination solely because of your race. She goes on and she says that the first time I experienced racism, albeit not drastic, or I did think it at the time, the racism is the looks you get at school, the feeling that that you are different or singled out because of your race. The jokes that your friends and colleagues feel you can't be a part of or wouldn't understand because of your race. The extra caution you see people take when you are out in public, and so much more. In this response, now this isn't, if you simply substitute the word race with caste, racism with casteism, racist with casteist, and leave rest of the text as it is, you will begin to understand and appreciate the effect manifest in both of the cases is identical. I'm coming to the end now. A recent book by Isabel Wilkerson has hit the bookshelves called Caste, the Origin of Our Discontents. In her book, she writes, caste is a granting or withholding of respect, status, honor, attention, privileges, resources, benefit of the doubt, and human kindness to someone on the basis of their perceived rank or standing in the hierarchy of caste. What is the difference between racism and casteism? Because caste and race are interwoven in America, it can be hard to separate the two. Any action of institution that mocks, harms, assumes, or attaches inferiority or stereotype on the basis of the social construct of race can be considered racism. Any action or structure that seeks to limit, hold back, or put someone in a defined ranking seeks to keep someone in their place by elevating or denigrating that person on the basis of their perceived category can be seen as casteism. Casteism is the investment in keeping the hierarchy as it is in order to maintain your own ranking, advantage, privilege, or to elevate yourself above others or keep others beneath you. Well, this book is very timely, especially after the killing of George Floyd and subsequent events that are unfolding in front of our eyes, now gaining attention and focus under the banner of Black Lives Matter. Statues of former slave owners and slave traders are being toppled, and re-examination of American history and role of British Empire occupy people's minds and imaginations like never before. Finally, let me add that Bob Blackman, MP, together with Barry Gardner, a Labour Party MP, were conferred Padma Shri, a civilian award by the Indian BJP government at a function held in London in January this year to mark Indian Republican Day. And let me say, finally, the so-called Mahatma Gandhi upheld the caste system and declaring it to be an ideal form of society. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry it was a rushed talk, but as you can understand, there was a huge amount to cover. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you, Satpal. I think it was, as you said, very lot of information packed in there, and I wanted to tell the audience that Castwatch UK, the website, if you always want to refer to it for more information. Also, Satpal's talks are there on YouTube, so you can go and listen to it. So there's some writing. And Professor Meena Danda from Wolverhampton, she has also written on this. So if you're interested, we can put some resources on our website, webpage. So we have about roughly half an hour for questions. So maybe I can just get the ball rolling with a couple of questions, and then if you have questions, just pop it in the chat, and Jairaj will moderate. So Satpal, I just wanted to ask you, you've given a history until now, but what would you say of Keir Starmer's Labour Party, and are you hopeful that there's some possibility to revive the campaign in some other form, or that this is taken up as a serious issue by the opposition? Where do we stand on that? And the second thing, as you know, Decolonizing LSE collective, what was so interesting to me is how many of these organizations and individuals portray equality legislation as a colonial attack on the Hindu way of life. You know, it's a kind of a decolonial language, if you like. So it's something to think about, that, you know, that kind of language is being used in a very perverse way to prevent equality legislation on caste. So I just wanted to ask your opinion that this, when these organizations and individuals say that it's an attack on the colonial attack or a Christian conspiracy and so on and so forth, how do the white British population, how do they react to this discourse? Does it prevent them from asking for equality legislation, or does it act as a silencing mechanism? So if you could address these two, and then, yeah, others in the audience, please feel free to ask questions.
Okay, let me deal with the first question in relation to Keir Starmer. Obviously, he's a newly appointed leader of the Labour Party, and we are in a pandemic, and different priorities occupy his mind. And he's a former lawyer, director of public prosecutions. I think he specializes in human rights. So it is difficult to know. It's too early to judge him because of the preoccupations with the pandemic. So we are hopeful that we will get a listening ear. But politicians are politicians. They are after votes. And so we don't know where we are, or where we will be with Keir Starmer. But I can say this, that his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, who was the chairman of the Dalit Solidarity Network, he was the patron of the Dalit Solidarity Network during the earlier parts of when the caste legislation was being formulated. And he played a very good, powerful role in supporting that campaign. And Labour is grounded in human rights, in protecting minorities. So, and it is a party which is connected with minorities and their aspirations. And over the years, those who have settled in Britain from overseas have a good alliance and working relationships with the Labour Party. And so if he continues with that tradition of the Labour Party to uphold equality for everyone, and then we hope that Keir Starmer will respond to that Labour tradition. And so I'll leave that there for now. In regards to decolonization and how the Britishers are perceived as evangelists and colonizing and occupiers and imperialists and all that kind of stuff. You see, British society, I've lived here, I've grown up in this country. There's a tremendous ethos about fairness and justice. And the great thing about the British principles of fairness and justice is that they do reflect within, and they do feel guilty about its past. And they do take steps to rectify some of the misgivings and some of the things that have happened, and particularly in relation to slavery and so on and so forth. And you can see that the movement, the campaign that came out with the Black Lives Matter campaign, if you look at the demonstrations, it's the white indigenous community races that have joined up in that forces. It's that community, it's the white community that is going around toppling the statues of former slave traders. And so it is a great credit to the British that they're able to stand up for justice, for fairness, and look back and take corrective action, learn from the past, think about the present, chart out the future for everyone. And as I stated in my talk, major corporations in Britain are taking up this issue of equality, of adopting policies and strengthening policies of inclusion. So that is the racism part. But at the same time, you have those who have settled in Britain from overseas, carrying on this baggage of casteism. And until those who are in a privileged position and can count and stand with those who are perceived victims or victims of caste discrimination, then that would be the litmus test of where they stand in relation to fairness, justice, and equality. And that is something they have to reflect on, to introspect, to examine history, to chalk out their future. And so this is an ongoing debate. It does call for introspection from everyone to come together and stand together on that.
Thanks. Well, I'll just open it to other questions, other responses. Jairaj, you'll take over?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ram. Thank you, Satpal, for this fantastic talk and reflections on it. We have some questions. Let me read those out to you. We have a question from Habiba. Thanks, Satpal, for the great talk. Very informative. I have a few questions. One, how can non-Asians and non-Hindus be better allies? Number two, how do you say to those who say caste is not a part of Hinduism? Or what do you say to those who say caste is not part of Hinduism? Shall we take that and then go to the next one? Okay.
Sure. Thanks for that. Thanks, Habiba. They're very good questions. I must admit that this is actually a burning question, both of them. So how can non-Asians or non-Hindus better join up with, well, the simple answer to that is join an organization like Caste UK and build solidarity, show solidarity, and then that way, that is a sure way of showing your concerns and in an active way. So that's one aspect. And if you go onto our website, www.castwatchuk.org, and drop an email to info@castwatchuk.org, and we'll pick that up and progress it on that basis. So what do you say to Hindus who claim that caste is not a part of their religion? You see, this is a very sensitive subject. Let me say frankly that as an organization, we are not targeting any particular religion. That is not our purpose. We were looking at caste discrimination as a cultural practice, and it's found in many other religions. You could argue that it's rooted in Hinduism, and then you could say that other religions copied it like a virus, and so they replicated it, and that is in a way an argument to be had. But as campaigners, we are not really interested in where caste system or caste is rooted, which religion it's rooted in, that's something I want to make absolutely clear. Now, what has happened is that those testimonials we were hearing during our campaign, people came forward and said, look, I've been victimized on the basis of caste. And they themselves claim that I belong to a Hindu, I'm a Sikh, I'm a Muslim, I'm so on and so forth. And so they conflated caste discrimination with their religion. And this then got picked up by the researchers. So communities in Britain are predominantly aligned along religious lines. They have their community organizations, which are affiliated on the basis of the faiths and the religions they belong to. So religion gets conflated into, a caste gets conflated into faith. But because the Hindus came out with the most powerful and vociferous voice, then it was important for them to then address that issue. And I think this is where you're coming from. You see, Hinduism is not a religion, okay? There's no founder like all the other faiths have. So, and Hinduism is like a conglomerate of heterogeneous beliefs. There are all sorts of different belief systems. And so when you start looking at their sacred literature, you will find so much references there in the form of varna, in form of jati. Okay, so and this varna and jati in particular, is a close ally of what we talk about when we talk about caste. And so caste and jati and varna are similar terms. So, but in the West, we don't talk about jati, we talk about caste, because that's a word that is well accepted and well known. So Hindus who are religiously minded, they should examine their religious texts, religious literature. But then they have argued back, and this is a question of interpretation. Jati doesn't mean caste. We believe in equality. It doesn't promote inequality. It's not about social ranking. It's not about hierarchy, and so on and so forth. So they'll just say all those things, which is actually contrary to what their religious texts actually say. So there is a deniability. So one of the ways is to kill off an argument, is to create confusion. First deny it, and then dilute it, and then thereby you hope that if you keep the argument going on for long enough, that somehow that argument will prevail, that the truth will be falsified, the false would be upheld as truth. So this thing goes on all the time. But I began to look into this, and I started to study Hinduism, and I've got some books sitting on the back shelf. You pick up any book on Hinduism, there will always be a chapter about the varna, about the jati, about the caste. Now, participants can tell me that there is a book on Hinduism which doesn't discuss those subjects, but I haven't seen one. Every book that I've touched, is hundreds. Now you go to school library, go to British library, pick up, and you will find references to varna, jati, caste. So unfortunately, Hindus as a religious group should really self-examine in what they're talking about. And so I think that's where I will leave it for now.
Thank you, Satpal. We have a question from Shika, and I'm going to read this out because we still have 15 minutes. So thank you so much for such an informative talk and for all of your work. In a recent talk on caste legislation in the UK, Meena Danda hypothesized that current discourse on race in the UK is drawn on by so-called upper castes to say that, she's quoting, in comparison to the humiliation that I have experienced at the hands of racists in this country, I am not casteist. The quote complete. For this upper caste person, there is a discontinuity in experience that allows the collective hypocrisy that caste is benign to embedded. In your experience, what are the best strategies for navigating, challenging this discourse?
I worked very closely with Meena Danda over the years, and she is a philosopher, and she knows very well what the discourse is in relation to that. And all I would say is that we have to argue your case by lived experiences, people who suffer. And I've tried to highlight at the beginning of this talk that these are lived experiences. Philosophers can argue in all sorts of different ways. Lawyers can argue in all sorts of different ways. And it is about categorization. It is about classification. It is about seeing the truth in what it is. And if people say that I've been discriminated on the basis of caste, you have to have that hearing. You have to give that person a hearing. And not only that, you need to give that person legal protection. So yeah, philosophers, lawyers can argue all they like. And that's where I will leave it for now. And you know very well, there are mountains and mountains of literature available on casteism and racism all over the place. So, but from where I'm coming from where the campaign comes from, is in terms of lived experiences of people. That's where I will leave it.
Thank you, Satpal. Ida wants to ask a question, I think. I can see a hand up. Ida, do you want to unmute your mic to ask a question?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Satpal, for such an amazing talk. You're really a very gifted speaker. I learned a lot. Thank you. I wanted to just quickly ask about this particular idea of like sort of caste Hindu inclusion into particularly the Tory party, and we see that very clearly now with the Tory cabinet. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on sort of what do you think are the ideological connections between a particular kind of Savarna Hindu elite and the Conservative Party. And off the back of that, I was wondering also what you think of, like what are the material links between Rishi Sunak, Priti Patel, both of them in particular, but also them as a larger phenomenon. What are the material links between these characters and the BJP Hindutva government in India? Thank you.
Okay, let me take the last bit first in terms of the Rishi and Priti Patel and what are the material connections and et cetera, with the BJP and the Hindutva lobby. I haven't got a clue. We have to examine their actions. And so far, it's difficult to know where they are. But in terms of their connection with the Tory party and occupying high echelons of power, there are two types of ideologies that pervade the modern world. Usually they are classified as right-wing and left-wing, and there's a middle as well. And so the world is actually polarized into right-wing ideology and left-wing ideology. And what we see in the current Tory party under the leadership of Boris Johnson, you can see that this is a right-wing party. And so, when you see the likes of Rishi and Priti and others occupying high echelons of power, you can see that these they have connections with this the right-wing element, and you know very well the BJP in terms of the policies that the BJP pursues over in India is a right-wing nationalist party, and so in terms of ideology, I think the present Tory party and the BJP are ideologically aligned. And so you have to be inside to know in terms of what is going on there. But there are stronger connections in terms of, between the countries in terms of trade. Britain has come out of European Union, and it wants to have trading relationships with international countries, and have already reached out to India and strengthening trading links. And that's the work of politics, everyday politics. So, but it does indicate the ideological alignment. And there were references made by Prakash Shah and that this legislation repeal is connected with somehow with that right-wing ideological basis that you were referring to within the BJP, connecting Manoj Ladva with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, etc., etc. So I hope that answers your question. But yes, I think it was a very important question, though.
Thanks, Satpal. We have, I think, 10 more minutes about. There is one more question from Tanya Jain, but Tanya is, I think, left maybe some internet connection problem, but I can, read that out so that she might listen back to the recording and for the others too. Thank you for a reflective talk. How can we start challenging the import of caste as a Hindu mandate to preserve Hindu righteousness and cultural authenticity in Britain? Many thanks. I think what she's mentioned, what she thinks about, here is the idea of the need to import caste in order for Hinduism and Hindu consciousness, cultural claim to be there. And her question is, I believe, how to challenge that.
Well, if I understand this question rightly, I mean, you see the very mere presence of the Indian diaspora in this country. And there are over 850,000 Hindus in this country, 1.5 million Muslims. There are over 500,000 Sikhs. It's a quite a sizable diaspora. And in terms of, you know very well that wherever people have migrated, they've taken their cultural traditions along with them. So this, as people travel outwards, they take their cultural baggage, and therefore these caste practices have ended up in the United Kingdom and also in the USA and many other parts of the world. So it's a tragedy for Hindus that their religion is connected with caste. And what is a further tragedy is that they don't accept that there is anything wrong with their religion. Now, I said at the outset, I don't think Hinduism is a religion because it is just a geographical term. It's like a people who are on the other side of the river Indus, given by the Persian invaders going back to the 6th, 7th century AD. And Hinduism as a religion was also only used, I think, by the Britishers to identify a section of a community who were not Christian, who were not Muslim. And so they were basically, the rest of them were all Hindus. So, but Hindus, I know from the conversations I've had with them in this country, don't like to actually call themselves Hindus, although they have temples in the name of Hindus. They have been using or coining words like Sanatan Dharma. I don't know whether you would understand that. Sanatan Dharma. Dharma is like a religion or a faith. Sanatan means something that was always present, always there from the time of immemorial, from the beginning of the universe. So they have references to the Vedas, the Smritis, the Shastras, and all of that literature that goes in the name of Hinduism. It is a tragedy that I think amongst the progressive elements of the Hindus come up and say, look, there was something historically wrong with this faith. So let's do something to address some of the present issues and build solidarities to make for a better future. So it's a conversation that Hindus should have amongst themselves, I think. And also the other religions, the Sikhs. Now, Sikhs is a egalitarian faith, right? And their religious book preaches equality. But the Sikhs have copied this thing, the caste system, like a virus, and so they've replicated it. But at least the Sikhs can go back to their religious texts and claim that they need to be better Sikhs. Yeah. But I'm not sure whether the Hindus can make a similar claim. So it's it's a paradox.
Can I quickly just, because there are no other questions, I just want to squeeze in a quick question, Satpal. It's a very connected to what you were saying, because I mean, it's widely acknowledged that Dr. Ambedkar, who happens to also be an alumni of LSE, has widely acknowledged his contributions to being the architect of the Constitution, labor laws, women's emancipation, so many things. But less talked about is towards the end of his career and his life, his conversion to Buddhism. And his, always emphasis on fraternity just as much as equality and liberty. So it's very important that you are stressing this lived experience aspect, which goes beyond the law. So in terms of the legal struggle for equality legislation, that is of course an ongoing struggle. But is there? Could you tell us a little bit about the links between Dalit communities in the UK and Buddhism, or is there any movement like that in the UK? And would you be able to share something?
Sure. It's a very important question, actually, because mentioning Dr. Ambedkar, who championed the cause of the oppressed, the Dalits and the untouchables, he was, sure. In terms of what you just described in conversion to Buddhism, you see, he got fed up, and he began as a reformer. He wanted to reform the Hindu society. And he waged a long campaign of 20, 30 years, 40 years to basically reform Hindu society. And he wasn't getting anywhere. And he came up against people like Gandhi, who was a staunch Hindu and a believer of the caste system. And although there were progressive forces operating within the Congress Party, but there were few. And then in the end, he thought that this is a complete and utter waste of time. This society is not going to be transformed easily enough. And by the kind of person he was, he rational, scientific, and upholder of equality and human rights and all that goes with it. He basically looked back into the Indian past, and then he reached and found that there was the teachings of the Buddha, which believed in rationality, in equality, in fraternity. It is very scientific. It's very modern, and on the 14th of October, a few days away, today is 10th, in 1956, he embraced Buddhism in Nagpur, in India, together with 400,000 people embraced Buddhism on that day. And there was another conversion at which another 200,000 embraced. So 600,000 people embraced Buddhism on that single day, over 2 days, 14th and 15th. And he set out to transform Indian society on the basis of the scientific approach of Buddhism. Okay, so that work is actually continuing in India and everywhere. There are centers around the globe in the name of Dr. Ambedkar. There are Ambedkar international missions in many, many countries. And there are Ambedkarite organizations and Buddhist organizations who have followed in the guidance that Ambedkar gave to people. And there are Buddhist organizations in Birmingham, in Wolverhampton, and I am a secretary of one here, and we have an Indian Buddhist Cultural Center established in East London to promote Indian Buddhism. So all of those things are going on, and there is a revivalist movement going on in Buddhism, not only in India but globally. In Britain, Buddhist numbers are growing up. So it's a thing that is happening, and so that legacy of Ambedkar is continuing, and that is very powerful. And when you confront caste oppression, atrocities, violence related to caste, you will find the Ambedkarites, the follower of Dr. Ambedkar, coming up and challenging and raising questions about the violation of human rights of women and everywhere. So Dr. Ambedkar, he died in 1956, but his legacy continues. His ideas, the more people, every day, more and more people read and understand and try and join up with that massive movement, that massive campaign. So this is this work is very much continuing, and and I am actually part of that group. Yeah, so good question. So brings you up to date.
Yeah. Sorry, there is one more question. If it's already 4:30, but is it okay to Satpal? Do you have time?
Yes, I guess I can do it.
Yeah, Kunal, please go ahead.
Hi, Satpal, George here.
Oh, George.
We had been on some platforms together. I don't know, perhaps you remember me or you don't. We've been in the Parliament House together in 2016.
Okay.
My question is, I work on caste,
Okay.
both in the UK and in India. I thought your talk was excellent. I really like the way you framed it, giving the history of it, and it was very useful for me. Thank you. My question is, now when caste in this the lived out experience of caste in the UK, a context which is different from where the caste initially originated in the Indian subcontinent. So in India, when we talk about caste, when we discuss about the constitutive principles of caste, we talk about purity and pollution, one of the main principles. A lot of people would talk about that. And from a Marxist perspective, we would also talk about caste is more prevalent in areas where wet paddy cultivation, like Gangetic Plains or the plains of Punjab or the South Indian rice cultivating fields. That means the need for surplus labor has contributed to the origin of caste or the spread of caste, you know. But in a context like UK, how would we analyze what constitutes caste? Is it something that has been brought along as a memory, which of course is true, but on the other hand, from an economic and analytical perspective, like as we would do in certain cases in India, as I just mentioned about wet paddy cultivation and things like that. Um, so what would be the constitutive principle?
Yeah.
Would it purity and pollution? Would it be something else? At a theoretical level, that's my question.
It's a very complex question. Let me just deal with it very quickly, which I did at the beginning in terms of purity and pollution. There were cases in Britain that people have cited that there was a case in Wolverhampton where a group of women shared a common watering tap. And there were some Dalit people working there, and when they drew water from the tap, and the other privileged classes took offense to that, and so because of that purity and pollution. And there was a case of a shopkeeper where a customer placed some money on the desk after purchasing some goods, and that money and the shopkeeper did not want to handle that money hand to hand. He asked the customer to put the money on front of the counter. So there's this aspect of purity and pollution, and these are actual testimonials and experiences of people. Okay, so that's that element, and the other element in terms of economics. You see, there is a point of departure here. There's a Marxian analysis of caste, and there is the Ambedkarian analysis of caste. And for a very long time, the Marxists never really understood caste because they kept on going back to the economic basis of society. And it was Ambedkar who rejected Marxism because it wasn't relevant. The issue was a bit more complicated. It wasn't just economics. There were other powerful forces. And he then emphasized those in terms of the religious notions and ranking and this kind of thing. You could be a rich untouchable, but you are an untouchable. So and this is born out. So it's not just economics. It's the social setting that brings it on. Okay, so I think people know about that. And so in terms of Britain, there are no economic factors. We have equal opportunity, and so the issues are more subtle, more nuanced, as I mentioned at the beginning. You see, it's people, how people are perceived. I'm in the office, somebody then refers to my caste or wants to inquire about my caste. Well, what relevance does it have to my economics? We both share the same office. I might be even a high-ranking person in the office. So why should anybody ask me about my caste? So where's the economic basis of that? It's about psychology. It's about control. It's about power. Yeah, it's very subtle. It's very nuanced, and that's how it is to be understood in Western countries, in Western democracies, and over the last 20 years, I can vouch for that. This is what happens. It's different from how it is perceived in India.
Yeah, no,
I hope that helps. And in other countries, I mean, caste itself, as you know, is not just exclusive to it. The reason why we talk about India is because we are from India. Well, I have my roots in India, with 1.3 billion population. Okay, so and so many people affected by the caste. But casteism is also found in other countries, like in African countries, in Japan, but they have different kind of manifestations. So I hope that answers your question.
No, very nice. Thank you. Good answer.
Great, thank you. It is just amazing that you took 6 minutes more than the 4:30 and to answer this fundamental question about the perceptions about theoretical premises and so on. So I'll hand over to Ram. Say thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, just thanks to all of you for making the time on the weekend. I hope you found this useful. I hope any of you doing work, on against discrimination will consider caste as an issue. Add your voices on social media when you see caste-related violence or discrimination. And I hope you will consider joining Caste Watch UK and contributing to the anti-caste campaign in the UK. And we'd love to hear from you if you have any, thoughts or comments or feedback which you want to pass on to us as the organizers or to Satpal. Please write to us. And please also consider looking at some of the other events that are part of the Decolonising LSE 2020 series. All details on the website. And finally, actually my colleague Fatma has just put it out in the chat. Finally, thanks to Satpal for giving us his time, and I hope that as a group we can call him back in the future, and we hope to do more such events on looking at caste discrimination, both theoretically but also practically what we can do. So I'll leave it there, and thanks again for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you,
Thank
Fatima.
Thank you, Satpal.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Jairaj.
And
Thanks,
thank you to
Ram.
the participants for
Thank
staying
you.
up
Yeah.
with me for all this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Bye-bye.
good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.